Hi, we are presenting on Saffron versus ASIC, and we have a group members including me. My name is Raksha Tandukar, and we have Navina Tamang, Animesh Shrestha, Robin Thapa, and Ravi Tamang. Here is a little bit of introduction. This case highlights the breach of director's duty of Saffron versus ASIC on the break of chief's obligations while they were on position. Experts related to the breaking of obligations were 7 previous non-official chiefs and 3 previous official executives, including the organization's secretary and general advice, Mr. Peter James Saffron. The rupture of obligation was charged under the Segment 181 of the Corporation Act 2001, which states directors and other officers of a corporation must exercise the power and discharge their duties with a degree of care and diligence that a reasonable person would exercise if they were a director or officer of a corporation. And some of the duties breached are Mr. Saffron, who joined the JHIL as General Advice and Organization Secretary in August 1998, was found to have breached his obligation alongside other non-official and official chiefs of the organization. High Court of Australia 2012. In February 2001, the organization board met to consider a proposition to separate James Hardie Industries Limited into organizations with noteworthy asbestos liabilities. Mr. Saffron was found to have broken the Act Area 181 by neglecting to educate the CEO board with respect to the James Hardie has certain extra data concerning the division proposition out to be uncovered to Australian Stock Exchange, and furthermore not exhorting the board about the actual given an account of which the leading group of organization depended in the third of partition proposition did not accommodate superimposed swelling, that is the cost of cases ascending a yearly rate more noteworthy than expansion. Afterward, it was discovered that the declaration did not satisfy the criteria for the adequacy of the assets accessible to reserve claims. Shortfalls by 1.3 billion were found. Moreover, it was discovered that he did not recognize the declaration of being valid and marked on to draft as yet, neglecting to sign in within 30 days of executive meeting of the organization. Under Area 180 of the Act, obligation inferred to the chiefs as well as to the officers and certain different administrations. In 2007, ASIC acquired the case to Supreme Court and affirmed that every one of the respondents other than Mr. Saffron, organization secretary and general advice to James Hardie at the time, has breached their obligations as executives by supporting deleting data. ASIC charged Mr. Saffron for rupturing his obligation as an officer in a few days, including not exhorting the board that the data was deleting. Mr. Saffron had contended that he was not in charge of the claim as an officer and ought to therefore not to be liable to Area 108(1). Notwithstanding, Mr. Saffron did not question that 108(1) didn't connect on his as an organization secretary, yet he denied his exclusive obligation in the limit as a general insider officer. Later, the High Court found that every one of the individuals from James Hardie had each broken their obligation as an executive, and furthermore discovered Mr. Saffron had breached his obligations as an officer of the partnership. As per NSW Court of Appeal, Mr. Saffron was an officer in 2 distinct bases. One, he was the organization secretary of JHIL, and another, he was a man who includes in basic leadership, which influenced the entire significant piece of the business. Amid the interest, Mr. Saffron contended that his obligations as secretary were constrained to the organization's secretarial capacity and did not cover exhorting capacity, giving guidance about ASX. He likewise contended that the court ought to likewise consider the elements of the joint organization secretary similarly capable, whose capacity were fundamentally authoritative. In addition, he contended that he was not included in the basic leadership to the partition proposition and expressed that the choice was made by the leading group of which he was not a part. High Court of Australia had given decision against chiefs of James Hardie for breaking their obligations by supporting false data about the organization. The executives broke their obligations by endorsing a deceptive declaration in regards to subsidizing at James Hardy to manage endures of asbestos. As indicated by the High Court of Australia, 7 non-official chiefs and those 3 senior administrators, including Mr. Saffron of Association, breached their directional obligations. The charge was made under Segment 181 of the Corporation Act 2001, under which they will undoubtedly act with care and industriousness in playing out their obligations. Verdict and analysis. James Hardy case has been built up as a milestone case in Australian legitimate history. It took over 5 years to choose, and this decision speaks to the current patterns in Australian corporate issues. The Court of Appeal decided the administration of James Hardy breached their obligation by reporting and endorsing a deceptive articulation. It found that Mr. Saffron neglected to act as general advice and organization secretary and broke his obligation and duty. They charged Mr. Saffron for neglecting to exhortation the board that the draft ASX declaration the board affirmed was deluding, and neglecting to consult the board that reports given by the specialist on the cost of asbestos cases were expanding and would transcend the general rate of swelling. Mr. Saffron did not completely concur with the decision and engaged the High Court. Mr. Saffron's contention was with respect to his charges as an officer, as he declined to go about as officer and offered that he ought not to be charged in the subject to Segment 181. His allure was being rejected by the High Court and upheld the Court of Appeal's choice and requested to establish trial judge's statement and transmitted the matter back to the Court of Appeal. The choice and punishment that was given to the respondent were $30,000 punishment and exclusion for a long time for non-official chiefs and $50,000 punishment and preclusion for a long time for official executive, that is Mr. Saffron. The judgment on this case demonstrated that how the court in Australia is fixing the cases around the higher administration in the multinational organization. The court has additionally chosen to execute strict corporate duties to extent organizations are concerned. The High Court has set down rules for organization secretaries in this choice. It has clarified that its organization secretary obligation to shield the organization from various sorts of lawful dangers and issues. It highlighted that executives and organization secretaries have extra obligations other than legitimate obligations. The decision from the court has made it clear that chiefs must not confine their obligations, rather they need to investigate and grow their viewpoint of information. The injury gained from this case is that executive must give careful consideration to each governing body meeting occurring at the organization. It is executive's key obligation to be an influence on higher administration and must lead an examination before setting on any choices with respect to the organization. Doing as such will likewise help the organization to gather most imperative information and data about essential matters. This will help the organization to avoid a distinctive monetary fiasco. They should not exclusively depend on optional information. The court additionally expressed that as the declaration given to ASX was misdirecting, it must be looked into to keep any setback. The administration ought to ensure the announcement have clear and precise substance for the business sectors. It is the duty of the higher administration to keep a record of various minutes of the executive gatherings of the organization. The administration ought to remember that minutes of each executive meeting is critical, and it is an imperative to survey each moment of the meeting in a point-by-point way. This record guides higher administration for further basic leadership. And here are some references. Thank you.